series for the next 4 weeks, and the series is entitled Inspired. And what I hope is that for the next 4 weeks, it's an opportunity for us to begin to look at how can we be inspired in life so that we will be inspiring to others. Have you ever been around someone who just inspires you? Whether it's the way they act, whether it's the personality they have, whether it's just the initiatives they have started, and you think, wow, to be like that person, or wow, how does that begin? Well, there has to be a starting point, and I'm gonna take a shot at it for the next couple of weeks. But I want to look at it in two ways. One is, how can we be inspired as individuals so that we'll be inspiring to others? But then also, how can we be inspired as a church so that we can be inspiring to this community, to those around us? And so that as a church, it's not viewed as, well, that's kind of where, certain people go on a Sunday morning and hang out, but rather people start coming on a Sunday morning. They want to know more about our church because of the inspiration, because of the things that are flowing out of the reality and the ministries of this church. And so that's where we're going to go for the next couple of weeks. And so we hope you'll come and spend some time with us on Sunday morning as we get inspired together. But this morning I want to start at a place where I think oftentimes inspiration begins. And in my own life, it's a place where I acknowledge I don't always realize it right away. And if I'm being real honest, it's the places in life that often bring inspiration that I really sort of want to avoid. Because I believe that oftentimes some of the great moments of inspiration, that kind of catalyst to move us into action, to move us into a new attitude or a new endeavor, starts in some of the difficult places of life. Starts in the places of brokenness. Starts in the places where it seems as if the circumstances or the situations are just too overwhelming. This past year, as some of you know, but if you're new or have been away, our family left Paris for a year and went to Malawi. And we're engaged in ministry there. We've been back for about a month now. But I remember being completely overwhelmed by a situation that I knew was coming, by a situation that I thought intellectually I had prepared for. But when I hit the ground, emotionally, I was sunk. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. The poverty is crippling. The majority of Malawians are subsistent farmers, 80%. And so what that means is 80% of the population live and die on the crops that they grow for their family and perhaps a little bit of sale. Well, year after year, there's always a wonder of, will the crops come in? The last 2 years, they've had very little crops at all. 2 years ago, there was too much rain, and so the crops were flooded out. And then this year, there was no rain, and so there was drought, and again, no crops. Back in April, the government issued a national crisis warning that they were not going to have enough food. You see, in Malawi, they talk about the hungry season. We talk about seasons like fall and Christmas and spring, but in Malawi, they talk about the hungry season. And the conversation isn't, is it going to come, but rather, how long is it going to linger? Intellectually, I was prepared for this. I knew what we were going into, I knew what we were stepping into, but when you see it, when you see little children, the same age as yours, following you down the street, with threadbare clothes, with dirty faces, just begging for a morsel of bread, you're overwhelmed. When you stop your vehicle at a traffic light and people who are severely disabled, who cannot walk but literally crawl along, are again begging for just something, it's overwhelming. When you see it on a day-to-day basis, people coming to your home, looking for work, looking for food, looking for anything that you could possibly give, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to respond. So Rebecca and I, we prayed about it. We talked about it. But that emotion didn't just suddenly disappear. Perhaps you've traveled to other countries and you've seen similar situations. Or heck, you don't even have to travel to other countries to see the reality of poverty and the impact it has. You go to downtown Brantford or Hamilton or Toronto, pick your city anywhere in Canada. I mean, yeah, we have a lot, but there's a lot of people who don't. And you see the reality. And so what do? Or perhaps it's other issues that you see or other issues that you're facing that just brings a sense of brokenness, and you realize we live in a broken world and we say it's supposed to be okay, but it's not okay. How do we respond? What do? I want to suggest this morning that perhaps it's often in the broken places of life that they can become a catalyst for greater things. You see, a lot of the times when we see the brokenness of life, we may look at it and think, I cannot do anything, this is just far too much for me. I mean, we could have emptied our bank accounts, we could have sold everything we had, but the thoughts that kept running through my mind is it really going to make a difference in the long scheme of things? And then if we're being honest, we not only start making excuses for ourselves, but we start to wonder, when is God going to show up? What is God doing in the midst of this? Why is these things beginning to happen? Well, I want to change our perspective a little bit as we turn to the scriptures and suggest that perhaps it's in the broken places, it's in the places where we seem overwhelmed, that it's actually God inviting us to step forward, to be inspired so that we will be inspiring. And so I want to turn to a place in the Bible. It's in John chapter 6. If you have a Bible, feel free to open it up. It's going to go up on the screens in a moment. If you don't have a Bible, we have Bibles here in the pews. It's on page 97. Now, John was one of the closest followers of Jesus. He spent a lot of time with Jesus. And at the end of Jesus' death and resurrection, years later, John wrote what is referred to as the gospel. If you're not familiar with the Bible, there's 4 Gospels, 4 biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they tell us about the life and the ministry and the reality of Jesus. And so we're gonna turn there here this morning. And as Vivian reads it in a moment, I want you to hear what the tension is, what the situation was, and how in the midst of the situation there were 2 different responses. Vivian, it's all yours.
The scripture is John chapter 6, verses 1 to 15. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him, because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. This is the word of the Lord.
And so if you open up your Bibles, whether it's the actual old school version or if it's on your phone, we're just going to keep it open and just kind of look through this verse a little bit and begin to see what does this mean for us? What is the circumstances for us? Now, if you have a Bible at home, I'd encourage you to bring it on Sunday mornings. We're going to be going through various passages. If you don't have a Bible, the Bible you're holding in your hand or the Bible in the pew in front of you is yours. It's a gift to take home. We would love for you to have it and just for us to begin reading through the reality, because what we see when Jesus encounters people is, although it happened 2,000 years ago, the people that Jesus met were often facing the same situations and challenges that we often face in life. And so in John chapter 6, we see very early on in Jesus' ministry, Jesus has just begun and he begins healing people. He's healed the sick. He has made people who've been unable to walk for the entirety of their lives skip down the road. And so Jesus performed all these incredible miracles, and now he and his disciples kind of withdraw a little bit. I mean, they've been with a lot of people and they need to just hang out and rest on their own. Well, surprise, surprise. When you start healing people, people don't want to leave you alone. Shocking, I know, right? And so people are coming towards Jesus, and Jesus is up on the hill with his disciples, and he looks down and he sees a crowd coming before him. Now we're told, it said there's 5,000 men, but if you read in other Gospels, they also tell this encounter, and they tell us that women and children were there as well. And so 5,000 is a very conservative number. Think 15,000 people. Think the Air Canada Centre packed full of people coming towards you. And it's like Jesus turns to you and says, "Oof, hey, insert your name here. Where are we going to find food for all these people to eat? What are we going to do?" And I love the fact that he calls Philip by name. It's not just a general ask, right? If Jesus would have said, "Oh, what are we going to do? What's happening here?" No, he calls Philip by name. So now Philip realizes spotlight's on him. He's probably thinking, ask Peter. Peter always has an answer, whether it's right or wrong. Ask Peter, not me, right? But Jesus is looking at him. And so Philip must be fairly good with numbers and crunches the numbers a little bit and says 15,000 people, a little bite, like we're not going to be serving a main course, we'll give appetizers. Jesus, half a year's wages. That's what I got. What I see in Philip is I can really appreciate. Because oftentimes when I see situations that seem overwhelming, what do? I make excuses. I give all the reasons as to why I could never possibly be used to do anything to change the circumstances. Kind of taking ourselves off the hook a little bit, maybe alleviating the guilt a little bit. We just start making excuses. And so one thing I realize is that is a trigger. That if I want to be inspired, if I want to see incredible things being done, then making excuses, I'm pretty sure, is not the answer. Thankfully, there's a second response. And the second response comes from two individuals. One is named and the other isn't. And I think the fact that the other isn't named is rather unfair, so I'm going to name him here this morning. You see, Andrew, we're told, is another one of the disciples of Jesus. And so John is giving Andrew credit. But I'm pretty sure, see, what Andrew did was he took a boy's lunch to Jesus, right? I'm pretty sure that Andrew would not have walked up to the little boy, grabbed the lunch, and then ran it over to Jesus and been like, right? I'm sure the boy must have come to Andrew and said, this is the little that I've got. And so I was thinking, what's a good name for this guy? This guy deserves a name. And so I'm going to call him Mpatso, right? Any expectant mothers out here this morning? This is a great child's name. It's Chichewa, Mpatso. I'll give you the spelling afterwards if you're interested. But it means gift. It means gift. And this boy Impazzo gives to Andrew basically the modern day equivalent of like a Happy Meal, like a filet of fish, right? Some loaves of bread, small loaves of bread and some fish, and gives it to Andrew, and then Andrew then gives it to Jesus. And I love what Jesus does because I do this as well. Unlike Philip, where I make excuses at first, and then when I think I have something little to give to Jesus, I hedge my bets. I hedge my bets. Maybe you're not like me, but I often hedge my bets. When I give it, he gives it to Jesus, and Andrew says this, he's like, here's a boy's lunch, but what's it really going to do among so many people? There's 15,000 people out there. You see, Andrew must have known something that Philip forgot. They just witnessed Jesus healing people, giving sight to the blind, healing those who couldn't walk. And so Andrew thought, there may be something more to this, but I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit. I'm going to keep one camp with Philip and one camp with Jesus and just kind of teeter-totter a little bit. And he gives it to Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He blesses it. He prays over it. And this must have been incredible to see. They start distributing to everybody. And I love how John points out that not only did everyone eat, but everyone had as much as they wanted. I'm sure we've all done this. You've been someone else's house for a meal, or you go up to a smorgasbord or a buffet table, and especially if you have little kids, right? Because kids love to pile their plates up, and you look around and think, there might not be enough food. Don't put too much food on your plate, right? Don't eat too much, right? Clearly, everyone had everything that they wanted to eat, and then there was leftovers afterwards, and it is an incredible miracle. An incredible miracle that started from a circumstance that was incredibly overwhelming. You see, one of the dangers is we jump to the miracle of Jesus and think, wow, I could never be like that. I could never be used by God like that. I disagree. Have you ever been overwhelmed? Have you ever made excuses? Have you ever doubted the abilities that you had could actually be used by Jesus? If you answer yes to any of those or all three of those like I do, then absolutely you would fit in this passage. Because the disciples were overwhelmed. Philip made excuses. Andrews doubted what could possibly happen. And then Jesus did something incredible. Now, John doesn't tell us afterwards what happened, but I would have to argue that Impazzo would have gone home that day a changed person. Andrew would have been changed that day. Philip would have been changed that day. Everyone who had a bit of a backdoor introduction to what was going on would have been changed. They would have been inspired and thought, holy smokes. Did you just see what Jesus did with a boy's lunch? I wonder what else he could do. And so how does this play out in our life? There's two verses I want to focus on here this morning. It's in John 6, verses 5 and verses 6, because Jesus tips his hand here. Jesus turns to Philip and says, where shall we buy bread? Philip probably heard his name being called and thought it was all on him. And that's dangerous for two reasons. One is we may respond like Philip and be completely overwhelmed, especially when we seem outmatched and we just tap out. Or imagine there was 15 people coming towards him, and Jesus says, where are we going to find bread? Philip is probably like, Jesus, I got this. I got some money in my pocket. I'll run down to the convenience store. We'll take care of them, right? I don't know if you underline your Bible. I underline my Bible, but I would circle, I would put arrows at the word we, because if you want to be inspired, you realize inspired people used by God are in partnership with him. It's not I will do this for you, Jesus. It's we will do this together. Because that way you're not overwhelmed, and then that way you don't jump into the driver's seat and think, I will figure this all out on my own. It's the reality of partnership. Because oftentimes we are inspired when we realize, Jesus, if you don't show up, some bad things, this is just not going to happen. I mean, a boy's lunch, that's a good place to start, but If Jesus doesn't show up and do something, there's going to be 15,000 hangry people out there, right? That might be a new word. I learned it from kids, hangry, you know? Angry because you're hungry, hangry, throw the words together. We can make up words, it's okay. It's all right. But Jesus needed to show up, or something was not going to go right. And so as we think of our circumstances, as we think of our situation, I realize one of the first things, if we want to be inspired, is when we see circumstances that are overwhelming, we can either make excuses or we can start looking for solutions. We can start looking for opportunities, looking for ways in which we can be used by God. And so for us, while we were in Malawi, as we began to think through just how could we respond, Rebecca and I, after conversation, after time in prayer, we came up with two concrete, intentional things we're going to do. The first one is we were going to increase our givings. We realized we had been incredibly blessed, and we are blessed by God, and so we were going to continue to give and to give even more. And the givings that we were going to give was going to be intentional in terms of helping those specifically, children, women, those who've been disabled, ministries that were assisting them. You see, oftentimes we to be inspired and to be inspiring, we have to put some skin in the game. Right? We can't just sit back and think God is going to do something. We have to take an initiative. That boy had to give up his lunch, knowing that quite possibly he may not get any of it back. And so one of the realities is oftentimes when we see circumstances that may seem overwhelming, perhaps it is God putting it before us and saying, what are you going to give up? What are you going to ante up? And so for us, we were going to increase our givings. One of the particular ministries that we gave to was, I'm going to put his picture up here, was the minister that I worked with. The guy on my left, I'm not sure if you can pick him out there. That's Enos Mahiwa. He was the minister at the church where I was working, and he's an inspiring individual. Along with leading a congregation of approximately 3,000 people, he also recognized needs in his own community. And he's from the home village of Malanje. And in Malanje, like many districts in Malawi, they suffer from just a lack of food. And in his specific community, there was 13 children who either had no parents or only had one parent. And they were the poorest of the poor. Here's the group right here. And so because of a lack of food, a lot of these kids were not able to go to school and concentrate. Because of a lack of money, they were unable to purchase school uniforms. They're unable to pay school fees. They're unable to buy school supplies. And so this Enos, out of his own pocket, began giving money to feed these kids every Saturday morning. He would use it as a chance to feed them, to pray with them, to encourage them, to see what other their needs may be. But then he realized he didn't have enough food to be doing this regularly, so he began to garden more. He began to farm more. And then I started to talk to him and say, well, what else is going to happen? And he told me about a dream, and that's a fish pond. He says, I would love to be able to start cultivating fish. Chambo, it's amazing, a white fish. And I want to raise pigs. And then from the proceeds of these fish and of these pigs, I can purchase more and help more and help more. And I'm thinking, Enos, that is an amazing idea. What do you need to make it happen? He said, $60,000. Pretty sure I don't have $60,000. Look in a few places. I don't have $60,000. But it was here I was reminded of, well, I have something I can give. And so we began to give to his ministry specifically, and to see 4 fish ponds now dug out, to see pigs now being raised. He would eventually love to raise cattle. He would eventually love to bring an even bigger garden and create an even better ministry so that these kids will be educated and will go on and do incredible things. Because of a small step that he took, we were able to step alongside because I was inspired by what he was doing. And not only was I inspired, but his community was inspired. 9 other people had joined in as volunteers to give of their time on a Saturday to help these kids. Now all 13 children are in school. They have school uniforms. They have school supplies. They have food, a good meal at least once a week, and other things to help them along the way. It seemed overwhelming. But because of small steps of faith, of bringing basically happy meals to Jesus, these kids are seeing their lives being changed. And so how does this come back to our life? I want to look at it both individually and then finally as a church. With whatever you are facing in your circumstances right now, perhaps you seem overwhelmed. Perhaps you see a situation where it just seems that things are broken and not going right. Would you consider that perhaps this is a way that God is desperately wanting to get your attention? Not to guilt you, not to overwhelm you, but to invite you to make a difference. To invite you to be a part of his greater plan and purpose. You see, in verse 6, in John chapter 6, John gives us this little tidbit. He says, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. I interpret that as being, those people are going to get fed one way or another. What Jesus was doing was inviting others to say, do you want to be a part of this? Do you want to be a part of this? And that's how we see the movement of Jesus taking place. Is not by his followers standing back and saying, Jesus, go to work. But by Jesus taking his disciples along with him and saying, are you going to be a part of this? Are you going to allow your heart to be broken? Are you going to allow yourself to be overwhelmed to a place where you realize your need for me so that we can make a difference together? And so perhaps this week, as you look at your circumstances, remember this story as a means to change your perspective of invitation, of God saying, what can you give? What can you do to make a difference? Because when we give the little to God, he exceeds our expectations all the time. As a congregation, what does this mean for us? You see, I find myself in many conversations with various people, and the conversation is always typically the same when it comes to the decline of the church, right? Fewer and fewer people are seemingly coming to church, and the goal is not to get people to church. Our goal is to bring people to Jesus, and this is one of the ways we do it. And so coming to church on a Sunday morning is never an end in of itself. It's a means to an end in terms of to know Jesus. But so often people come and we lament the decline of Sunday morning. And what do? We're kind of like Philip, right? We make excuses. Wow, there's sports on Sundays. That was a big mistake, allowing sports on Sundays. Or people are busy, or people are just doing other things. Or maybe sometimes Sunday morning is boring. Let's just own that one. And different things. We make excuses. But there's a great opportunity for us. There's a great opportunity for us to impact people's lives, to inspire others so we can be inspiring. And so I want to suggest 3 things. If you're someone new here this morning, if you're just checking Jesus out, you can ignore this next section. All right, this is not about you. But you can come for the next number of weeks and learn how we're going to be more inspiring as a church. But if you're committed to Jesus, if you're committed to this church, I want to suggest 3 things for you this morning. First one is this. No more excuses. Let's just cut the excuses short. Let's realize this as an opportunity, not as a means to just step back and fall back and do nothing. So let's stop making excuses. Let's stop passing the blame onto other things and say, there's an opportunity here. The second thing is, let's spend some time in prayer. Notice Jesus, when he took the boys' lunch, he prayed over it. He blessed it. And prayer, I believe, is vital because we realize that this is going to go beyond us. And so maybe begin praying for people in your family, people in your community, people you work with, people in your neighborhood. Not everyone, not a general prayer, but specific people and family that you want to know Jesus, because I'm going to make the assumption that you follow Jesus because you realize he makes a difference in your life. And so if that is true for you, don't you want that for someone else? And so start praying for people. And then the third one, and this is where we push out of our comfort zone a little bit, invite them, bring them to church. Remember, again, not as an end in of itself, but as an opportunity for Jesus to be at work in their life. Now, I know if you're like me, you're going to come up with lots of excuses, or I do anyways. And I make excuses on behalf of the people that I'm even praying about. They're not going to want to come. They're going to be busy. They're going to be doing other things. And like, you know what? Let them answer for themselves. Just invite them, not in like an over-the-top sort of way, but invite them to come. In October, we're going to be doing a series called Heart Attack, where it's going to look at issues of pride, of jealousy, of anger. We may not want to admit it, but I'm sure we all wrestle with it. And so here's an opportunity. You can invite them in October. We're even going to make up little cards so you can give it to them as a reminder. Now, you don't have to wait till October. It's an opportunity for us to come. And so as we see situations that may seem overwhelming, we can either start making excuses or we can begin looking for solutions. And when we step into the opportunities, not only will we be inspired, but we can be inspiring. And that's what I want for my life. That's what I want for this church. And so are we going to take those steps of faith? Next week, if you come back, we're going to talk about, I believe, a prayer we need to be praying in order to help us take these steps of faith. But this week, whatever circumstance you find yourself in, will you use it perhaps as a catalyst for Jesus to inspire you so that you will be inspiring to others? When we do, differences will be made. We see it in this story. We can see it in our lives as well. Let us stand together as we sing.